now if you have any questions, please raise hands first. Okay. Michael?
Okay, no, I know that the topic is Nietzsche, right? But what you are talking about overcoming yourself, right? And getting all those puzzles that you were given, with meaning that your talents, right, your capacities, and you need to put it together and make something from it, a meaning, right?
Yeah.
But I would like to ask you, what is the, if you are familiar with this, what is the difference between this kind of overcoming yourself and so-called of transgression in the sense of Foucault? Because Foucault was very influenced by Nietzsche, and I don't know if you could you clarify this, the difference between this overcoming yourself and overcoming or transgressing or getting to the boundary of not being alive, even in the sense of Foucault, because it sounds kind of different.
To be honest, I've read some Foucault, but I actually can't answer your question. I haven't. I don't have enough background reading to answer that. I'm sorry.
Because you said that in Nietzsche's sense, this is like you have a chaos, right, and you need to order it.
Right.
And it sounds a little different.
Yeah.
There is in Foucault wants to have a chaos, but that's why, because it is definitely, there is a connection, strong connection between those two thinkers.
Right.
In the sense of working with yourself.
Foucault's definitely influenced by Nietzsche's thought on power.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. But I'm sorry, I can't answer your question.
I know it's on the topic.
Angel.
So overcoming yourself and basically exerting power over your own weaknesses.
Yeah.
It sounds very much like control, like enforcing control over your weaknesses. Is that what he meant?
Basically, yeah. But all the internal, your passions and your emotions that can lead you to do. We're always wanting this, wanting that, wanting to go in different directions, and it's being able to harness that, put it in order. That comes down to if you think of a single person, he would say that like everybody's got these elements of the Apollonian and the Dionysian in them. It's when you synthesize them that you become. Later in his writings, he called that the Dionysian, or it's basically another word for the overman. Somebody who's taken control of their passions, then they're in control, and they've given form to their existence.
But that's really a trivial notion, because we always had the notion from Christianity onwards. We always had the idea about conquering our passions, about becoming, let's say, Christ-like or becoming saint-like. That idea was enforced with Christianity in an extremely strong manner.
Right.
Controlling your passions, overcoming, thinking in a particular way, which is moral. I mean, we had that already. What is so new about it?
Actually, well, that's a great question, because that's actually an important part of his philosophy I didn't really discuss here tonight. But that's a really important question. Nietzsche, he has a lot of respect for Jesus, but he actually remarks at one point. He says there was only one Christian, and he died on the cross. Because like his big issue with Christianity is that he says it appeals to a low level of morality, because he says that if you look at the basic passions that underlie the entire Christian moral code, it comes down to a desire for revenge and fear. In the West, we've constructed an entire moral system based on those things, especially revenge. Like quotes like, "Oh, the meek will inherit the earth," or "It's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to get into heaven." And he calls it slave morality, because what you're looking at is that you're talking he called it slave morality because those are the reactions a slave would have to their master, like this desire for revenge, and that's what it appeals to. And Nietzsche calls it ill will, and he says those are the things we need to get rid of. When we sense ill will in our morals, we have to conquer that. Those are some of the things that we need to deal with to get over that.
But how to conquer it? By questioning its truth values, or by exposing it for how to do that? Did he offer a way of how to do that?
I guess so. I guess it would be first off, you have to question it, and then become aware of it. Like the idea like the Socrates had, where he called himself the midwife, right? Like, right. And like he's like you have that's what it is. The first step is being aware of it and questioning those values, and then correcting them afterwards. Because the first step, of course, is being aware of it. And unfortunately, we still live in a society where most people aren't aware of that. Even now, like 100 years later.
But maybe there's a little paradox that you ask about this control, right? But the Nietzsche is also saying that actually, if you want to find the meaning, right, and make your life full, you need to find the passion, right, and live your life passionately, right? So you actually don't control. I mean, I don't know what's the exact proportion between controlling some passions and using this energy to kind of, pull yourself together and create a fully fledged life. What is the
well, I guess
proportion between control and a kind of developing passion?
And I guess that's important too. And I think the fact of the matter is, if we read his stuff, most people don't do that. Like he says, he basically says, education at the end of the day is only for the few. Is what he says. Even though he says that this is like not too many. Most people he would characterize as being members of the herd. Like they equate with Darwin's position, where there's not much difference between the human and the animal. Most people don't rise to the highest levels of the will to power, or they don't refine their will to power in that kind of way. He says basically the highest levels are. He used to say there were three things. He used to say they were philosophers, artists, and saints. He later dropped saints as his thought progressed, and then he left it only at philosophers and artists as being people who can conquer these things and turn it into something that produces higher culture and value, and they make something out of it.
Well, was he in agreement with Schopenhauer about actually what left for people where they can, the area where they can kind of find the value is aesthetics, right? Arts, right?
Sure, yeah.
That basically everything makes no sense, but we still can escape from this very dark perspective into aesthetics, right? And find there a short-term release.
That's
so
right.
Is he saying the same? Nietzsche.
It's a very similar idea, yeah. Both Schopenhauer and Nietzsche, they did consider art very important, yeah.
I had a question. You were talking about finding meaning in life and how Nietzsche was saying it's important for everyone to find meaning in life. I wonder in his time, if it was the same in his time, or if it's always been the same, but a lot of people, I can imagine, especially with Christianity and the meaning kind of being handed to them, a lot of people find, and I don't have any problem with, I think parents is a great thing. It's a great thing to be a parent. It's a great thing to take care of your child, but a lot of people find their whole meaning in life just through their children. Does he ever talk anything about that?
Actually, he does, yeah.
Mm-hmm. What is he?
He sees that as kind of a it's not necessarily a good thing. Yeah, because it means that basically, he sees having children as a good thing when you're a fully developed person, you've conquered yourself, and you've become an overman. Overman having children is a great thing for Nietzsche, but if you're somebody that's still on the lowest level of the will to power scale, and you still enjoy inflicting pain on other people, maybe you might even do that to your kids. Who knows? But you're not necessarily the best people to be reproducing, really. That's what he would argue there. Yeah.
Right, and besides not being the right people to reproduce, I think my point is that you can have a whole segment of people, not a specific group of people, but just a large percentage of people on Earth that only find their meaning of life through their children. They say, oh, I had a child, now that's my reason to be, or whatever.
Well, it for Nietzsche, it would kind of equate with, like the dogs and cats, reproducing out on the streets here in Taipei. It's kind of the same thing. They're doing exactly the same thing. There's nothing in that case separating the man from animal. Like he wants to see fully developed human beings having children, and hopefully those children creating a situation where they can surpass their parents, become better people than their parents. That's what he wants. That's what he would advocate for. Not necessarily people who just can't deal with their own passions. They can't get a hold of their life, so they decide to have kids just because, like as another form of escape from themselves. And that's, it's not healthy for the parents because they're just using the kids for escape from themselves in that situation, and the kids aren't going to learn anything from that. But unfortunately, that's what happens all the time, which is why at the end of the day, Nietzsche talks about the herd, talks about the masses, and saying really education is only for the few anyway, and you only give food to he who's hungry.
More questions?
Any more questions?
Yeah. What does he say about love?
But love.
Love, yeah. It's such a misused word. It's so, especially with all our Christian backgrounds. And so what does he say anything about it?
Well, to my knowledge, I can't think of any specific lines at the moment, but he talks about marriage.
Yeah.
And he basically says that should be a union between, like what I mentioned before, two single ones,
Yeah.
two people who've developed themselves and overcome themselves and are on that process of becoming overmen or are basically there anyway. He thinks those are the people who would be capable of that of true love. That would be the implication, I would argue. Although I can't think of any specific lines at the moment on love specifically, I think that relationship of two people and even friends as well, because there are different types of love. There's brotherly love, romantic love, self-love. There's all sorts of different types of love. But it would be the person who's in control of themselves and is living a happy life and can answer yes to the question, would I do it again? Over and over and over again? Sure I would. They're the people that would be capable of that.
Alex mentioned that he was sort of crazy in the last 10 years of his life.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, he. Well, this is kind of a mark against him, really, historically. The idea is that he got syphilis in a brothel, and that actually it affected his mind later. He always suffered from migraines and headaches and stuff early on. He actually had to retire from Basel University after only a short time of teaching, really. But yeah, in the last 10 years, he actually did go insane, and there was no output. And it was during that time he actually went to live with his sister. Actually took care of him, and that book that the Nazis ran with, the Will to Power. He was planning to write this magnum opus that he wanted to put together and basically solidify his thought in, and it never happened. He had a few writings and whatnot sketched together, but his sister took that, and his sister was a Nazi, and she was married to a proto-fascist herself. Nietzsche could not, all of his letters, he condemned that. He, all through his writings, there's probably nobody who sat down with a pen and a piece of paper and wrote more passionately against nationalism and anti-Semitism than Nietzsche. But the Nazis took that and ran with it, and his sister warped all of his writings, and that was one of the reasons his image became tainted, was from that, because the Will to Power is probably not even I don't consider it to be an essential read myself.
Yeah, I heard that she picked up random notes from his office and from notebooks and some jotting, some undeveloped ideas, and
Right.
just put it together and
Right.
published under his name.
Right.
So it's,
His sister was not. She was an anti-Semite. She was a German nationalist, and she was married to one, and like a proto-Nazi essentially. And yeah, and she did. That's exactly what she did. It didn't do his legacy any favors for the short term. It's only in recent times now that in the history of thought that people are kind of correcting this stuff now and coming to a better understanding of it.
but you were also saying you asked about his last 10 years and syphilis and his very bad physical state, right? But he suffered from the really heavy headaches.
He did, yeah.
It could last for a couple of days.
Yeah.
But he still could write a book within a month. And
You mean when he had his headaches?
yes, during headaches,
sure,
like
yeah.
he was really. I mean, he himself had a really passion and the strength to overcome this kind of
Absolutely, yeah. And
difficulties. So
that's actually an important point as well, because that gets into where Nietzsche rejects the division of mind and body. He says, that's an artificial division in Western thought that we have to get rid of. And he says, he had that idea of the healthy mind, healthy body, that old Greek idea, and he saw that as his health as a challenge, and he said that was one of the reasons he said if I would he believed his own philosophy hung his life was dependent on his philosophy and his ability to overcome that and to keep himself mentally healthy. Otherwise, he would succumb to disease, is what he believed. And yeah, so absolutely, that's important.
Because many documentaries on him emphasize this, that he wrote about power and will, but he died, miserably, being sick and weak, right? But which is not true, because
Right.
there was a period in his life that he was struggling.
Right. No, and like I said, yeah, he wrote prolifically during that time when he was living on a pension from the university he was working at, and he actually went to he was living out in the Swiss Alps in little cabins, and he was trying where the air was good, right, and all of his like especially Thus Spoke Zarathustra is laced with imagery of hiking in mountains, and mountains being this symbol of rising up in life and moving toward being an overman and a person who conquers themselves. It's all in there, and that it comes from that time when he left the university, and he composed a lot of his writings like hiking. He's got a remark where he says, the only thoughts that have value come from walking. And again, it's that unity between thought and body, where the two go together. He's got like Schopenhauer. Nietzsche has big disdain for what he calls armchair philosophers. He says, they can barely move their arms because the cobwebs have accumulated so much around their shoulders. Right? He's got no use for that. It's very much. He believes that intellectuals should have this conception that our mind and body they're one and the same. They depend on one another mutually, and yeah, he thinks that philosophers today have to have a crucial role to play in the development of culture.
Yeah.
You emphasize that his philosophy was about like overcoming like obstacles and like and low passions and whatever, which would sound and like glorifying life and the strive for life, which would kind of sounds like can apply to all. But don't you have a feeling that his philosophy was kind of elitistic? It was for the chosen ones. It wasn't just for anybody.
Sure, he says that. Yeah. Yeah, he warns you right from the beginning, in the get-go. He says, this isn't for everybody. Yeah, absolutely.
Are you familiar on that point? Because there are lots of there are books written on like Nietzsche and Buddhism. Are you familiar with like where they actually draw the line between the two? Because like there are some like concepts that remind on Buddhism, but the idea of like elitistic philosophy has nothing to do with Buddhism. So.
No, sure. No, there are parallels, and he really respected Siddhartha Gautama and Buddhism. But the only thing is, and early on, he actually considered ascetics to be kind of up there on the scale of the highest will to power. But eventually he dropped it because he said fundamentally, if you're a Buddhist, one of the problems that you run into is that you're kind of repressing your passions because you're still at war with them. You're not in a position. You're not in that. You haven't reached that level where you've completely conquered them, so that it's not an issue anymore.
Well, you might say that as well for his philosophy, because if you conquer your passions, that doesn't mean that you're done with them, right? I mean, psychologically speaking, you might have bigger issues with them than when you actually could express them.
Yeah, it's an ability to use it too. I guess the best way to think of it would be more of an integration where the will to power's capacity for reason and rationality is in control. It's behind the steering wheel, right? Of those things. Whereas if you're a Buddhist, like actually early on, he has a lot of respect for Buddhism, and he thinks like I said, he considers people who are ascetic to be some of the the most developed will to powers. But eventually he gets stuck on that point and eventually drops them from his list because he says, well, they hit the point where they're just kind of burying things because it's more or less he doesn't see them as being in a position of real mastery. That would be the thing.
I just get the impression that he says a lot of things without really, like, I think in those times Buddhism was entering, Eastern philosophy was entering Europe, in big waves, and he picked up some things. A lot of readers were picking up a lot of stuff on Eastern way of thinking, and
Yeah.
and actually Jung warned a lot against that. That we can really misunderstand what they mean when they talk about conquering passions. We can just understand it in our own way of what that means, because we're completely disassociated from from their culture, from that
Yeah.
context. So, yeah, from that aspect, I think, I get the impression that he talks a lot about this. He might be mixing things about control and overcoming, and he getting syphilis from a brothel
Yeah.
doesn't really speak about him conquering passions, right? So it's a little bit of
Maybe it's not
contradictory.
it's not the natural passions like reproduction, food, and maybe it's other passions. He's talking about some other passions, maybe, right? Like lower passions. What do you think?
I think you're right. What you're actually hitting on though is kind of an important point too, because he actually does, he says right at the beginning, really, that there's no truth. There's only per se. There are only interpretations and individual representations. And he says basically the whole of philosophy, by definition, has to be an ongoing battle between ideas. Because you run into that. Not to say, I mean, sure, we should be looking at all these little things. And were you able to do it yourself? And those are questions that we should always be asking of him at the same time, because he had his slips as well. Because there's a woman he was in love with at one point, Lou Salam, I think is how you pronounce her name, but she, after when they couldn't get married, he kind of set him on a little path where he actually became, in some of his notes, he was thinking about suicide. So I mean, there's all these little things that we need to be aware of too, right? Yeah. But I think that's important though, in that there's no real conception of truth per se. There are only positions that all of us can have.
Right, but then we come to this point that imagine all these people going following their passions, and everybody thinks that they're Übermensch. Like everybody, because my truth is my truth, and and then I'm the Übermensch. I'm the next step. Maybe it can work, but it's kind of
right. Yeah, no, that was one of the things that I mentioned there too. Yeah, that's really, absolutely, like that could be a problem, but yeah.
Inflated egos walking around.
Right.
And
and that's.
I think we could understand it in more moderate way.
Yeah.
That is simply that you just recognize your abilities, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you develop it with a passion, right? Let's say you are good at something and you do it, right? Passionately, you do it, you develop it, intends to become better person, right? It's not more about imposing something on others. That I'm an Übermensch and then and you are not, right? And I'm better.
Well, and that's what it really comes down to. The real danger in Nietzsche is and his writing style lends itself, and he's got some of the most beautiful prose that you're going to find anywhere. I mean, I just personally enjoy reading it just because the guy was on fire when he was writing. Nobody writes like that. It feels like music when you're reading it. It's you get those tingling sensations and stuff. It's just beautiful writing. It's amazing. But the danger is and then he's got all these words he's throwing out there that can be very easily be misinterpreted, like blonde beast or master race. Like the Nazis ran with that stuff in directions he never intended. And so it his writing style lends itself to misinterpretation. And that's one of the biggest issues with it. I don't think so much. I think the problem would be with egos, like you mentioned, people. But in that case, it would be more people that misunderstood what he was getting at. Because for him, you could be a fully developed will to power, or you could be the overman, and you're a hermit in the woods, and you're just taking care of your garden. You could be that person that actually has a fully developed will to power. You've mastered yourself, and you don't even need to bother with other people. You have no desire to hurt anyone. Actually, it could be a safer situation, assuming that everybody could reach that level, because then all of a sudden nobody wants to hurt anyone. They actually do just want to help each other. It would be actually, if you could do it, it would be a harmonious situation. But the fact of the matter is that he said, it's not for everybody. The vast majority of people today aren't working towards self-mastery. I would argue myself anyway, like, and I in agreement with Nietzsche that I don't think most people are working on that. I think it's a very small number.
We're almost out of time. If we have maybe a couple more questions, I'd like to ask a question, if it might be stretching it a little bit to put yourself in his shoes, but what do you think Nietzsche would say about the world now in the 21st century?
I think you would probably see a lot of the same problems. Yeah, like the notion of nihilism that we all.
Do you think he would see it's worse now, or is it a little bit better, or is it just basically the same?
Yeah, especially with mass communication and McLuhan's idea of the global village, where people are just becoming more and more the same. Like, I think he would look around. The opposite of the overman is what he called the last man, which is the person who just wants to be the same as everybody else. They just want to, like, they're just a very.
What do you think he would say, that the American dream is sort of the last man idea? With a ranch bungalow and 2.5 children and 1.5 dogs and.
I think if you asked him, he would probably say they call it the American dream because only people who are asleep believe it.
No, he was the fervent criticizer of democracy in the way we have it today.
Yeah, because he said, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Because it comes, the morality comes from the
government.
Not the government, the herd.
Yeah. Well, you have in any parliamentary democracy, you've got 5 choices. In the United States, you have 2 choices of opinions you're allowed to have, and that's the argument, right? He's actually an apolitical philosopher. His ideas of power, though, do touch on politics, especially international politics, because he says that, like, the only nations that lash out at others, he actually argues that it's an expression of their own weakness that they're doing that, like the United States invading Iraq or Afghanistan to seize control of areas where there happens to be oil. That's a position of economic weakness, where they require resources. And he would give something like that as an example of countries doing that. But by and large, he is apolitical, and he's more concerned about the development of the individual.
So from one side, actually, he could be disappointed with the American dream, right, and being a latest man, right?
Because of the last man. Yeah.
Last man. But from the other hand, there's a lot of existentialist thoughts and overcoming yourself and being individual in the States, right? At least from 200 years ago. That you self-made man, right? And all these ideas, which could be traced to his writing.
Oh, that's actually a complex discussion, but I think I think the idea of, like, the American dream, that I was kind of joking before, well, half joking, that only people who are asleep believe it, right? It's mostly grounded in want for material things. There's nothing self-perfecting in that. It's like, I have a new truck. Well, good for you, in the end of the day, and that person who just bought the new truck, a week later they could be found dead from a gunshot or a self-inflicted gunshot in the driver's seat. The American dream is very tied up with materialism, and that's not, Nietzsche has a remark on that from Property, where he says, "We are possessed by our possessions." Like, property is not something he's too concerned with.
But
I think we're running out of time. Okay, last question.
No, because I want to go back to the early, let's say, colony time, right? The people coming to the States and facing difficulties, and they had to overcome them, right? And it was it wasn't inspired by existentialism, because it didn't exist at that time, but it was sort of you could kind of connect it, right? So from the other hand, you have Nietzsche's thought presented by those people who went to the States and tried to be individuals and strong, right, and kind of make their life by themselves, right, without help from others. But from the other hand, 200 years later, you have all those people who kind of follow the herds, right?
I don't really agree with that, because basically, if you took a bird and put it in a new environment, it's going to have to build another nest. that there's nothing in that that separates man from animal in that situation. It's just purely a survival issue. That's all. That's all it is. It's not. There's nothing necessarily self-overcoming in that. And most of those people would have been Christian, and which for him is it's an immoral moral system to start with. So there's nothing. No, there's nothing really self-perfecting in the way he's talking about. They were just people that were at the level of animals who still believed in Christianity.
Okay, thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Jim.